Hello, everyone. Can you hear me at the back? Excellent. Well, good afternoon. Welcome to SIMI and welcome to our conference session on wine sustainability. We are running this session today and then another one at this time tomorrow about some other work that we're doing. But we represent, as you can see from the screen, the Sustainable Wine Roundtable. My name is Toby Webb. I'm one of the many founders of the Roundtable. And we are a coalition of wine businesses from huge retailers to small producers and everybody in between, working together to create a common understanding of sustainability, tools, working groups and outputs on sustainability in wine. As many of you may know, there are lots of different approaches to sustainability taken around the world. And our members, who are some of the world's largest retailers, distributors, producers, and others, want to collaborate to understand how we can create a common language, common data points, and common approaches to managing our impact, our negative impact down, and our positive impact up. And that level of coordination we feel is required. And so a number of companies and others, NGOs, academic institutions, we have collaborated to create the Sustainable Wine Roundtable. And tomorrow we'll be discussing the Global Sustainability Reference Standard that my colleague at the back there, Dr. Peter Stanbury, give everyone a wave, Peter. So Peter will be chairing the discussion tomorrow, where we're talking about how we're trying to join the dots on sustainability, specifically through a piece of work around a reference standard. But for today's session, I'm joined by four of our members who will introduce themselves briefly, and we're going to talk about the technologies that they're using now, the technologies that they may use in the future to try and drive negative impact down and positive impact up. And we're going to do that across different areas of the wine sector. We have a retail representative, we have producer representatives, and they cover various aspects of the wine production and retail chain. So we're then going to have time for questions. So if you have a question at any time, just wave at me, and I can bring you a microphone and you can ask your question. Because technology is a broad subject, but it seemed like an appropriate one given this exhibition. So our objective is to understand some of what our speakers are using in their businesses to drive sustainability, not just in their businesses, but down the supply chain, all the way to the customer. And that's where we want to get to eventually. But it's a long road, and sustainability is full of cliches, and one of those cliches is that it's a journey. And at the Sustainable Wine Roundtable, we've only been going now for a year and a half, and so we're at the beginning of the journey. But with more than 80 wine businesses involved as members, we're starting to feel like we're beginning to make a difference. So if you want to know more about the Sustainable Wine Roundtable, you can talk to me, you can talk to my colleague Peter, my colleague Tom next to him at the back. Give everyone a wave, Tom. You can talk to Tom, who's our membership and outreach manager, and we'll be happy to answer your questions and maybe even welcome you on board as a member of the Sustainable Wine Roundtable. So let's now turn to our topic of conversation, the technologies that can make a difference. But before we get into that, I'm going to ask each of our speakers to introduce themselves briefly. So we'll move down the line. Let's start with Bruno Le Breton. So Bruno, tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do.
Thanks, Toby. Hello, everybody. I'm Bruno Le Breton from France. I'm wine producer in the south, in the Languedoc region, and producteur négociant.
I'm Erica Landon-Loving, and I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for one of the top 10 wine producers in the U.S., a public company called Vintage Wine Estates.
Thank you, Erica. Simon.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Simon Mason. I'm Head of Wine Sustainability at a UK online wine retailer called The Wine Society.
Thank you.
And last but not least, hopefully, Will Drayton with Treasury Wine Estates. We are a very large international wine group with wineries in Australia, the US. I'm based in California and help run sustainability across our Californian vineyards and wineries. as well as many of the technical aspects of growing and making wine.
Thank you. Well, let's stick with Will for a moment. I've asked each of our panelists to make a few minutes or less of comments about the technologies they see as really making a difference in sustainability today that they're using. And then we'll also talk about what they feel are going to be the emerging technologies that drive change. So, Will, sticking with you, what's moving I don't want to use too many English idioms here. I was going to say what's moving the needle, but what's making a difference for you right now? Will?
Well, that's a very open-ended question, so I'll try and be relatively brief. But what's moving the needle is there's an enormous amount of interest and groundswell. I think it's been accelerated by the pandemic and by interest in what's happening to our planet. And you couldn't see it more obviously in your face than being in California, where I live for the last few years, with wildfires, with drought, with all of these crises that keep being thrown at us. And we've done a lot of work looking at these crises and how they might change in the future with climate change. And we realize that we're at the beginning of the journey here, and it's not going to get easier for some period of time. It's going to get more tricky. So one of my first points is that we can start taking action immediately, but it's not just about lowering our footprint, and sustainability is not just about the impact we have on water. It's not just about the impact we have on CO2 or on packaging waste or recycling. It's also preparing ourselves to stay in business in a changing climate. So equally important to all of the steps we do to reduce our impact is to be prepared. So one of the things we've done recently is a large climate risk analysis of all our growing regions around the world, because then we can turn that into what sort of technologies do we need to employ that will be useful for the future to reduce our footprint, but also to reduce our risk. You just have to look at the hail that happened in Italy this year, where you realize that over just a few days, the entire source of your vintage can change direction. And so I think the same is true in California, where we had a heat wave that was historically hot, and we needed to change our entire plan about what we were doing in just a few days. So many of the systems we put in place are to be nimble as we pick our grapes and we plan to bring them in from growers and from our own vineyards to various wineries. We need to have systems and data and processes in place that are very quick to adapt and are somewhat predictive as well, so that you can see if this rainstorm is coming during harvest, and if it's as bad as they say it's going to be, what should I do? Should I pick this vineyard or should I leave it out? And so one of the things we're investing in is some software, some AI processes to help us predict those climatic events and stay ahead of the curve. Another thing that's really important as well is some of the simplest stuff. We could get pretty deep down the tunnel of complicated winery technology solutions, but wineries are in a great position to be able to take advantage of the technological revolution that's happening anyway in things like solar panels. And so you just have to look at the changing prices in energy and realizing that your costs keep going up and up and up, that you can really leverage those increasing costs with your desire for more sustainability by adding solar panels and expanding that. So we're planning on doing a very large expansion of that, and it's not particularly technologically complicated. You could just go out there and procure them. But it's some simple situations like that, we believe we can take about 75% of our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions down just by changing to renewable energy. So some of the biggest changes are some of the most simple changes and ones that make economic sense as well.
Thanks, Will. And is everything being driven by climate change at the moment? That's what we hear so much about. It's such an important existential issue. Is that what's really driving investment in technology to reduce emissions? Is that focus on climate in your business?
It's complicated. It's not just climate. So climate is definitely something in our minds, but sustainability is so much more. When we're trying, it's a very competitive labor market in the US right now, and I'm sure it is in many other places in the world. And so when we're trying to recruit and attract talent to work in our wineries or work in our vineyards, our public stance on sustainability is incredibly important for attracting the right caliber of talent. So having high values and lofty standards in terms of sustainable goals are important. And so we put them out and publish them, and it helps with the recruiting. And additionally, we're a publicly traded company, so we're traded on the Australian Stock Exchange. So in many ways, that's terrible. You've got to make sure that everything that you do is put out there in the public domain, so people can see what our water use is, or people can see what our energy use is, and it makes competition tricky. There's no hiding, there's no secrets that you can have when you've got to publish all this data. So in many ways, that also forces you to be, better than you would be otherwise if you were able to keep that stuff secret, or maybe not keep it secret, but just have the reason for looking into it and going, oh my goodness, we use that much water, or oh my goodness, we use that much CO2, or oh my goodness, the footprint of our glass is like this. So it's been eye-opening from that one. The final point is we've also managed to tie our sustainability ambitions to be able to get cheaper loans from our banks. And so we have the largest sustainability-linked loan in the Asia-Pacific region, was raised by Treasury Wine Estates. And what that means is, as we borrow money from the bank, we actually get a lower rate of interest if we hit certain sustainability targets. So what we try to do is tie our progress and our passion for sustainability into, sort of holding our feet to the fire. I don't know if that translates or not, but making sure that we go further and faster by getting a cheaper rate of borrowing, which means we can invest faster in new sustainable technologies as well. So tying all those things together is incredibly important.
Thank you. We'll come back, I'm sure, to many of those things. Simon, moving on to you. Retailers are very climate conscious these days, and you have a particular customer demographic, I think, that cares deeply about environmental issues. So tell us a bit about the issues you're tackling and perhaps what customers are asking for.
Sure. So we're actually set up as a member-owned organisation. So each of our customers holds a share in our business, which is a slightly unique model in the world of retail, and it does set us apart from other wine retailers in the UK. But increasingly our members are telling us that they expect sustainability, both environmental and also social, as one of the criteria that they're looking for when they're purchasing. Our members are typically, one would say, kind of middle-aged, 50 plus, but newer members, younger members are coming in who are the ones driving this change, and they absolutely require sustainability credentials as part of the offering. So as a part of that, we've recently launched a very ambitious sustainability strategy which covers the environment, so greenhouse gas, and I'll come back to that in a moment, but also biodiversity as another kind of key aspect. But a core part of it is increasing understanding and knowledge amongst our customers, because it's fair to say, I think, that many people aren't fully aware of the technology and of the processes that go into making wine at all. So when you try and have a conversation with them around sustainability in wine, they don't quite understand the context that we're dealing with here. So, for example, water usage is a key factor, or the fact that in many cases wine production can be something of a monoculture. So you need to have this conversation with the consumers first before you then start talking about what you're going to do about it. We're very fortunate that we work very closely with our producers. So we work with about 800 or 900 producers very closely, quite a few small producers. And so we're committed to very practical steps that can make a difference for us all. Going back to greenhouse gas as something of a driver, because it's something that's very measurable and it's something that businesses can compare themselves on the dates that they're going to achieve net zero. We have recently completed a full footprint across our business, and it's no surprise, I guess, to us that the majority of our carbon footprint comes from our scope 3s, which is our packaging and it's our wine production, which is what's creating the bulk of our carbon emissions. So our big focus is working with our supply base on simple steps, much as Will was talking about, like solar panels, for example, or perhaps better sort of data management in the vineyards, looking at how they can reduce fuel usage, tractor passes in the vineyards, whether they can look at insetting, for example, whether they can use cover crops rather than fertilizers, simple steps that can actually make a quantifiable difference to that big chunk of our carbon emissions. And the final piece is just to say that we want to be able to draw this information through and communicate it to our customers because we feel we have that responsibility to create the value for our producers. So by talking about the individual stories and the individual initiatives that producers are taking, we feel we can create that value, which then encourages producers to further invest in the technologies which are going to make a difference across the entire supply chain.
Thank you. And I guess a key thing for a retailer is having data. And data has to come from the supply chain so you know what they're doing. What role is technology playing there in kind of harmonizing and simplifying both what you're asking for and also how you get it?
I think it's at this stage it's incredibly complicated actually. We are having to at the moment deal with an awful lot of industry averages for various parts of the supply chain, and I think this is one of the areas where an investment in data at winery and vineyard level would pay massive dividends to really help identify the hotspots. Not just in terms of greenhouse gases, but in terms of water usage or the other kind of sustainability impacts that we could look to change. We're having to draw some quite big kind of sweeping conclusions from data which we're not massively confident with, and then dig in a lot deeper in specific instances to see whether that's proved or not. And really it's something that we I think as an industry could do a lot better.
Well, that's something the Sustainable Wine Roundtable is trying to drive collaboration on. What are the data points that are being asked of you as wine suppliers, whether you're a producer or whether you're selling bottling equipment? Data from you to customers is going to become increasingly important. We have a working group underway through the Sustainable Wine Roundtable with retailers looking at requirements on bottle weight, for example, over the next 5 or 10 years in different product categories. What is the appropriate bottle weight that retailers, that our retailers who represent more than 50 million wine consumers will be asking from the supply chain? That's one of the areas we're looking to collaborate on, and you'll see more from us on that in the coming months. Erica, turning to you, you've been focused on data collection and getting the right system set up. So tell us a bit about the role that's playing in helping make sustainability start to happen in your supply chain.
Yeah, I appreciate you setting the stage for me on data, because when we were coming here to speak, and Toby, you were asking us what technology makes the biggest impact for me sustainably right now, it really is setting up data collection. So instead of guessing how much water we're using, or maybe having somebody who goes out once a year or once every 3 months to check on an analog flow meter, I'm across our 13 wineries. I'm setting up flow meters that are connected to telemetry and sending that data onto a platform. We use one called Ag Monitor, which is out of California. And that same platform now is also collecting our energy data straight from the energy producer, from PG&E. So where things used to be quite manual, and to create, for example, our scope 1 and 2 carbon footprint, you have to sit and pull information out of invoices. We're starting to try to streamline as much as possible and automate it as much as possible. And we keep saying it in sustainability, you can only manage what you measure, or you can't manage what you don't measure if you go the other direction. And it really is very important. We can't get lost in the numbers, but the numbers give us a chance to see where we can have the biggest impact. And for example, fertilizer, when we did our first scope 1 and 2 now, which actually hasn't been released yet, but it will be very soon, I thought fertilizer use would have a big impact on our carbon footprint. It didn't. It was 1%. So, and if I compare that to the carbon footprint of our bottles, we're not actually calculating those right now, but I'm doing it for specific SKUs. The bottle just knocks everything out of the park. I could probably spend my entire next 3 years of work only on lightweighting any bottle that goes through our production facility and have a bigger impact than the technology in the winery. But that doesn't mean we don't want to do everything, of course. But so one of the things I want to say that is extremely important to me in my role is that any technology that produces data that can be used in sustainability needs to be able to come into the same platform. If you're developing your own software for your product, for your flow meter, that data has to be owned by me. It cannot be owned by the people producing the flow meter, which is something we have run into.
Yep.
And their platform needs to be able to speak to the one that I have chosen for us to run on, because I can't have 13 different wineries log in to one platform for water, one for energy, one for fuel, one for temperature control of the tanks. I want to be able to manipulate everything in the same one or two platforms.
Thank you. And I guess that clarity over data will perhaps one day lead to farmer data, grower data being valuable to them as it is to you.
Yeah.
That's where we want to get to, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, in other areas of agriculture, there's a huge focus on how do we value the farmer's data and make sure a farmer can get value from that data as well as using it yourselves.
And I would say this is one of the interesting things. If you're a producer, I'm collecting this data for our ESG reporting for the financial markets, but in the process, of course, what we're finding is opportunities for efficiencies, for reducing our cost, for running processes at the time of day where electricity is cheapest, for reducing our water use. And water costs money not only in itself. We have wells, but the energy used to drive the water out of the ground costs money. And this all of a sudden becomes much more visible. And so we're actually saving a good amount of money as we're doing this work.
Great. Well,
which is, of course, helpful.
Absolutely. We'll talk more about that. Bruno, we've just been looking at a video of your latest investment in sustainability technology, which is a large hole in the ground. Yeah. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we just finished our reservoir in the south of France. It's very dry in some place in the world, and we believe that in the future we'll need some water, not only for the vine, and we hope we don't need this water for the vine for the future, but for the biodiversity. And I really trust that, I really believe that in the future we will have to prove our contribution. It's very important to reduce, but most of the time what we do, we repair something we did bad in the past. Contribute positively is something different. It's another way to see our job, and another way to see how is our product. The wine used to be a product from agriculture. It's now moving to a cultural product. And the cultural product is not the same view on the society. We have to show the value of your product and what you do with the money you earn with it. And the way you show how you use the money for it, the way you show who you are. And that's the contribution we try to expose, to show with our wine. Each bottle of wine, each people who buy our wine, the bottle of our wine should be convinced that the money he put it in serves to something that makes sense to him. So that's why also we need the technology. And when I visited the CMA this morning, I had this idea, this question: how will be the CMA in 20 years? Which industry will be still there? Which one will disappear? And what I see, there's a lot of technical solution. On some space, you see some contribution for the future. I went in the Padovan stand, and they have this magnific machine that with the CO2 of the fermentation, they create algae. That's something, for me, crucial for the future. We catch the CO2, we put in a tank, and then we don't let it out. We create a product that can be reused for something else. That's the way we have to think. If we don't take this path to think differently, we won't solve the solution of our clients, and they will move to other products. So, and I would love that the wine will still continue to be a popular product. So it's very important to continue to find solution, cheap, an innovative solution, sustainable, should be cheap and easy to accept to buy from a small producer like me, and also that makes sense to the consumer, that he understand the meaning of that. And slowly, the provider, the big industry behind the wine, they have to understand that. Glass, cork, caps, they're in the same boat. Will we use glass bottles in 20 years? Imagine that only 20% of the wine industry use glass bottles. Only 1/3 of the CMA will stay. They will change totally. It could happen. So that's what you have to have in mind, because we are all together in the same boat.
But of course, those exhibitors who disappeared at CIME in 20 years will be replaced by others,
course.
right?
Of course.
Who will innovate to provide the solutions that we need.
Yes, of course, because we generate a lot of money. We generate a lot of emotion, passion. So people love us. Despite the pesticide and the alcohol, we are necessary for the life of a lot of people. That's why I'm sure we'll find solution. But we have to be on this way to find solutions for the future that create value for us and for the consumer.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to ask you about reducing of chemistry in the vineyard and your views on the role of technology. Because we see a lot of these emerging technologies now showing us that disease outbreaks can be seen much earlier and that we can then reduce our impact. So technology looks like it's starting to play a really interesting role there. I wanted to ask you about that, and Erica and Will as well.
Yes, with technology we understood something. I am one producer. I utilize pesticide. All the standards I had with me were born when pesticide was a problem. And the biodiversity was the only problem we had on the environment. Now we have the greenhouse gases and the limited resources of the planet. They came very fastly and they came to us very, very strong. But when you confront what you do for the biodiversity, sometimes it costs for the greenhouse gases. Only one example, the most important pesticide in the world for the agriculture is sulfur. Sulfur in the vineyard is the biggest in terms of tons. Sulfur is produced by the oil industry. Of course, it's good for the biodiversity, but it can't be the future of the wine to use a pesticide coming from the oil industry. So that's a balance. But we have to keep in mind, and the technology helps us now to calculate not only the impact on the environment, on the biodiversity, but also impact on the global warming and impact on the limited resources of the planet. And with that technology, we'll be able to make the good choice for the future.
Thank you. Erica, what do you think?
The question was the most interesting future technologies for the vineyards sustainability?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, we want to drive down negative impact. We want to improve our positive ones. So,
Yeah.
what do you see as the role of technology and so on there?
Half of my thing is still data collection. You're going to think I'm a data nerd, and in a way I am. I want the numbers behind it. I think what you mentioned also about technologies to act earlier is interesting. So I'm interested in. I'm not going to say that we use them on any large scale, but I'm interested in things like sap flow meters. The soil probes, getting that data together. And again, I want it in a platform where I can collect it all in the same spot. But one of the things that I thought was most interesting that I heard in the last couple of days was this kind of platform sharing data and using AI to analyze it. And it was Italian Barolo producer Chiara Boschis, and she said that from the University of Milan, I guess he's pretty known, an agronomist, Massili. Dr. Mazzilli, he had developed a platform for them in Barolo so that all the producers could share this data and know that they needed to treat in advance. Like right when humidity was changing, when things were changing, the AI sent out alerts saying, okay, it's time, you need to treat now. And that was before it would rain, before something would happen.
Yeah.
So by treating earlier, it was easier for them to stay then organic, because instead of doing the 3 passes you might need to do with a weaker product, they could still just do one, just like the conventional producers. I thought that was very interesting. Otherwise, I'm a little bit enamored with the new self-driving tractors for the vineyard, also for the opportunity of using less pesticide, less treatment. Because if you go to organic and you need to do more passes, then of course you don't want to do that with heavy equipment using regular fuel. Also, one thing that I think might be a difference between Italy and California is in California we cannot find the staff. Please, if you guys have excess vineyard staff, send them to us. We need them desperately. So it's really hard to hire people if you need to start doing more vineyard work in order to use less chemicals.
Yep.
But if you can use a self-driving tractor to do it, and that's also an electrical tractor, and it drives back to the winery and gets charged by solar panels, we're still in early stages of that, but I just think it's very exciting.
Yeah, Will, do you get very excited about this? I mean, in other areas of agriculture I work in, you see PepsiCo and General Mills and Nestle, they're employing some really incredible technology to try and reduce inputs. I mean, what's the conversation that you're having internally about this sort of thing?
I mean, they're very much along the same lines as what Erica was talking about. In my vineyards in California, in January, we'll have 4 or 5 different either electric or autonomous tractors operating and testing. So the future is already here. We'll be right around the corner. We've had them out in the field in some places this year, and you know, costs need to come down and supply chains need to get better. We need to learn. You know, the regulations around using some of these new machines haven't even been dreamt up yet. So at the moment in California, it's difficult to put one of these autonomous tractors in the field because you instantly break all these labor laws potentially. Because they were invented or written down back in the 1970s when there was no such thing as a tractor that would drive itself, and if you didn't have someone sitting on the seat ready to press the stop button, you couldn't operate it. Well, we live in a very different world now, so it's important to be, you know, dipping your toe in. I don't expect it to change overnight, but I am here to say that I think that future of those electric self-driving vehicles with all of the benefits that Erica talked about, you know, ability to have a better conditions for our workers because they're not sitting on a tractor in the middle of the spray, they're off in the safety outside, out of harm's way. Or you can use softer chemicals that have shorter windows of efficacy because you can get back into that field multiple times. Or you can start plugging together some of the information we have. You know, when I first started in my career, we would have one weather station every vineyard or every other vineyard or so. And, you know, so in Napa Valley, we would have 5, 6 different weather stations that would cover this area we have. We now have these small micro weather stations where you could have 3, 4, 5 per vineyard, and you can understand the microclimate and therefore the pest pressure at each of these different spots. And then imagine coupling that with autonomous tractors that are just going on a spray mission to just hit that one spot rather than your entire acreage. How much more efficient would that be? But also, how much lower your inputs would be. So before we have the magic bullet of, you know, the pesticide that causes no harm, which I don't think exists, we can do an enormous amount to lower our overall inputs, and we can track ourselves getting better because of that. So I think some of these technological improvements will be a key. I also think, Toby, just really quickly, that we don't have to go high tech to have amazing inputs on our vineyards. The Napa River is an amazing system, one of the few rivers that's in a built-up area in California that's close to San Francisco that has not been completely paved over with concrete and with everything else. And that's because viticulture saved the Napa River. You know, there was a law that came in place saying that you couldn't develop this land. Its best use was for agriculture. Its best use was for growing grapes. And it's preserved that watershed for the last, you know, 50 years because of that. Now, I know that that's not an unfamiliar term in Europe. You know, we have lots of those kind of like rules and regulations, but it was incredibly important in California to preserve that natural area. Well, Treasury, I'll wait for 2 seconds. It might be more than 2 seconds. I feel like this is some comedy sketch where I'm supposed to be... Can you guys hear me if I keep talking, or is it difficult to hear with the thumbs up, thumbs down?
Let's try.
I'll keep going. So we've discovered by restoring and putting back the Napa River to its natural state, we've done all sorts of things. We've reduced our flooding risk from climate change and reduced the impact on our properties alongside Napa. We've also reduced the number of pests and diseases that come out of the river. A lot of invasive pests live in the Napa River, and by removing invasive plants that host those pests, we've noticed the disease in our vineyards has gone down dramatically. So we have to spray less and treat less. And then finally, by expanding the Napa River to a wider course and giving some of that vineyard land back up to the river, we're growing new trees and riparian habitat along that river, so it's actually helping us with our carbon sequestration. So there can be some very natural solutions to these things. They don't all have to be high-tech.
Absolutely, and that's where I think concepts like regenerative agriculture in a landscape environment could play a really valuable role. And you think about what happened here in Italy earlier this year in the Po Valley with the river and rice production. It's been disastrous for farmers, and we have to think, what can we learn from wine and elsewhere to help regenerative agriculture provide resilience for areas in and around wine, not just in the vineyard. So that's a really good point. Thank you, Will. Now, I can see you, most of you seem to be paying attention and you're awake, which is great, because now it's time for you to ask some questions or make some comments. If you could try not to make a kind of Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez speech, you are welcome to offer a comment or a question to our panel. Who would like to do so? Ah, gentleman over here. Right, I'm going to bring you the microphone. Can you just tell us your name and who you work for as well? Thank you.
My name's Drew, work with Coonawarra Wines in Australia. I use a company called Deep Planet, which a good satellite company. He's nodding his head, he knows about it. We've been doing some great work with them as far as reducing our spray side of things. So with the amount of analysis that we get from them, we're getting the mineral ratios right, increasing the nutrient density in the plant. And so by analysing that and putting any top-ups of those minerals through the dripper lines, we've found, so we're certified organic. We haven't, in fact, we've increased tonnages. We do 1 to 2 sprays a year. And we know that our health in our vineyards is one of the highest in Australia, because we've analysed it. So our bricks in our leaf sits at about 15.5. And so with the help of, with Deep Planet, we were able to see the work on what we're doing with the carbon sequestration in the soil, and that for us is very important because we're they obviously want that knowledge to use for other vineyards. So we know for a fact we can increase it by at least 1%, which is sizable in Coonawarra. We are working on increasing that more by increasing the Caton ion exchange and charge. But what we've found just by getting that balance, by increasing nutrient density, we then have that disease pressure. We just don't have it anymore. So and sorry, this is a bit long, but we actually grow yellow white stamen flowers down the mid-rows of the vineyards. That brings in trichogramma wasps, which catch all of our light brown apple moth and vine moth, or eat their larvae. So again, we haven't sprayed even an organic pesticide for 16 years.
Thank you. Always nice to share stories. And clearly you should be a member of the Sustainable Wine Roundtable, which you should join immediately after this session, so you can share professionally with Will and Erica and Bruno and Simon further stories. We look forward to your application in about 10 minutes' time. Thank you. Excellent. Now, who's next? Anyone else have a comment or a reflection on that comment at all? That was quite specific, but it's always nice to hear stories of things going well, isn't it? So
yeah, Deep Planet's a really interesting company, and there's several companies out there, so I'm not going to plug any one person in particular, but remote sensing is an incredibly important tool for our industry. As we try and grapple with area-wide problems like water in the watershed and how much water is entering and how much is being used and whether we're sustainable there, or carbon in the farming environment from all of our growers, it's increasingly difficult to know what everyone else is doing. And so some of these tools like Deep Planet that have remote sensing that can see landscape-wide shifts and show that the wine industry, especially where the wine industry is intense, and we've got a big footprint in the land, that we're doing the right thing, I think is really helpful. It helps with the communities that we're in and that we rely on to provide us with workers. And it also helps making sure that we're on the right track. So yeah, more remote sensing.
thanks. Erica?
Yeah, I agree. Remote sensing is very interesting. And we've, so for our water, for our reporting for the financial markets, we need to include how much of our grapes are sourced from highly water-stressed areas, areas of high water risk. And for that, we use Aqueduct from the World Resource Institute, which is free, but it's also very generalized. So we're going to try, we're going to do a little pilot now with a company called Water Plan. And hopefully what I will get is data. So they take NASA data, but they run it down to very site-specific location, and they can tell us what our water availability is and will be for that specific location. And ideally, so now I'm just thinking futuristically. Ideally, I would be able to use that tool also to see where our the grapes that we buy, so where I cannot put water sensing equipment in the vineyard, but I can actually use that data to look at the areas we're buying from and see if there's a high risk or a low risk for water there.
Thank you.
So,
any other comments on that point? Don't have to. Go ahead.
I would just say there's also great scope for amazing stories that we can share with our customers around some of this as well. So where there are these great initiatives taking place, I mean, just imagine how good it would be if you're doing all this work like the gentleman over there, if through like an e-label or a QR code on the bottle that you could take the customer to the vineyards to look at the cover crops growing, to go out on some of these kind of automated tractors to on the passes through the vineyard and so on. And that's how you're going to get real engagement with customers as well. And I think there are quite exciting technological opportunities around that kind of communication piece. And again, it goes back to creating that value for producers, which I think is going to help us all on this kind of sustainability journey. Sorry, Toby. That's I think that's how we can all help each other there. We all know that that people buy wine based on the kind of the stories and the connection with the producers, and I think this is the latest development and the next opportunity in that to see how the sustainability piece is actually playing out in some of these vineyards and some of these technologies really come to life.
Thank you. We have a question here.
All right. Christian Butzke, Professor of Enology, United States. I was just curious. I appreciate your effort, yet I think I've heard the same conversations 20 years ago when we first started about global warming and winemaking. Yet the industry, and if you look around here, the sparse interest in this seem to indicate that there's too much greenwashing, too much storytelling going on, and too little action. How do you see the global wine industry actually truly doing something about it? You can talk all about the little experiments you're doing, but on a large scale, this is all a drop in the bucket. So who leads this industry globally to actually provide any true changes?
Thank you. A nice, easy one there for the panel. I think that's where the Sustainable Wine Roundtable wants to play a role, and we hope to play a role. We're definitely not there yet. Erica.
Well, I feel like I'm sounding like a broken record here with my data focus, but I really think that this you can definitely manipulate data. You can definitely manipulate your carbon footprint, your water use, and so on. But I still believe that adding numbers to your reporting as a bigger company and moving away from just the storytelling. I mean, we have a couple of wineries that have been certified for a long time, and we've been doing a lot of storytelling. But as of a year back, we need to put numbers on these things. And there aren't, I mean, Treasury's been doing it for, I think, 5 years, and Constellation for a couple of years. And doesn't mean that we are definitely leaders in sustainability, but we are big and we need to put numbers on it, which means that next year I have a number on it, and the year after that I have a number on it. And I have to show, if I say that we're going to reduce our carbon footprint by 20 or 30%, I have to show now, because of the financial markets, what they're requiring, not actually what the consumer is requiring, or even our buyers, though I hope that will change. We have to show them that we're progressing. And if we're not doing that, then we're definitely greenwashing. But I just believe that getting metrics into the mix is going to move the needle over time.
Thank you. Bruno.
I can say something more. I agree with you. The profession is very good in information, in education. We can see what we do with alcohol. And we don't do anything, and it will perhaps give us a lot more problem. We don't do a lot of information, but also the consumer is leading us. And the consumer is slowly moving in the direction that we want to go. So I hope they will join together. But at this time, an organic wine in an EV bottle with a lot of gold in the label will still be a good choice for the consumer, whatever it is. So we also need to inform and to engage the consumer and give him the transparency he needs. And that's also our project with the Sustainable Roundtable. We need transparency because it won't keep out the magic of our wine, the mystery of a project. Wine is not something very difficult to understand, and it will always be, but we need a part of transparency on what we do to inform, engage the consumer with us. And I hope in 20 years, it will lead us better than now.
Thank you, Bruno. Simon, a quick question for you. I always think of the Wine Society as a really interesting pioneer in sustainability because you've got the remit and you've got the member demand, and you're not burdened down with too much palm oil, beef, soy, and stuff that all the other retailers have to deal with. But that also must make you worry a lot about greenwashing, I guess. So how, I mean, to the gentleman's point, how do you cope with that? How do you get that balance right between talking about what you want to do and being seen by your customers as overplaying your hand?
I think, well, we are committed to being totally transparent with our customers, and I think we are very fortunate that they have that level of trust in us because we are a member organisation, that they do allow us to explain what we're doing in a bit more length and a bit more detail than perhaps a supermarket, for example, might be warranted. And as Toby touched on, we are going quite big in sustainability, it has to be said, in a number of different initiatives. So I mentioned our sort of greenhouse gas emissions. That's a very big project. We are putting our money where our mouth is. We are investing very heavily in alternative packaging trials next year. So, for example, bag-in-box, recycled PET, other form of cans, to get our member reaction and also to assure ourselves that the quality of the wine, which is what we're all about and producers are all about, that is still viable. And this is a trial that we are very committed to. It's going to cost us a fair bit of money, and we're not doing it to necessarily make a return. We're doing it to have learnings ourselves that we can also share with the industry as well. So that's kind of one example. We're also going to be investing very heavily in our supply base. So on our path towards net zero, we're looking to focus on insetting, for example, within our supply chain. So working with our producers to plant other crops, plant trees and so on, to reduce the overall carbon impact of wine. We're working collaboratively with others in the trade in the Sustainable Wine Roundtable and outside around bottle weights. And this is a massive project. And one where we as we're not a big company, but we punch above our weight perhaps in the premium wine sector where we have a voice, and we are sharing the views of our customers with our producers, and it's very clear that heavy bottles are anachronistic, and really for many of our consumers a 420 gram bottle is all that's needed. So we're putting our money where our mouth is in that conversation as well.
Okay. You talked about telling the story of one of your producers through something like a QR code, and I've seen Dole Foods do this, by the way. They did it in Scandinavian, German, Northern European markets. They had a banana bunch, and it had a QR code, and it just said, "Point your phone at me." And I stood in the middle of a supermarket in Northern Europe, and I pointed my phone at this bunch of bananas, and suddenly I was doing an augmented reality tour around an organic Colombian banana farm in the middle of the supermarket, which is pretty much the coolest thing I've ever done in a supermarket, because the options aren't very many. And I thought, what about the possibility, and Dole have had well over 1 million people do that. Now, does it sell more bananas? No, not yet. But is it a great exercise in transparency? Well, yes, I think it is. And Simon, your comments made me think about what's the potential there for you to be doing that over the next few years with a select handful of producers and then testing. What would success look like if you were to do that?
Absolutely. I think that's a great opportunity. And one of the areas that we are going to be working on with our producers is around what we're calling vineyard centres of excellence. So looking to take some of the technologies, perhaps that are here today, or some specific initiatives in the vineyard and in the winery, and invest in them ourselves and work with a particular producer to, for example, implement carbon capture in the winery, or implement some of this data gathering technology in the vineyard. And again, as a collaborative exercise, so we would invest for that producer to benefit, but also for our wider supply base to benefit. And whilst we can only invest in a few, we can share that knowledge, and we'll be developing what we're calling a sort of a supplier forum where suppliers can exchange ideas, share best practice, and ask for help from other producers around the world who might have experienced the same problem. So I think it's a great opportunity actually to
and we know from other areas of agriculture, if you want to change farming practices, farmers will listen to other farmers, not to you. Well, they might listen to you a bit, but they're really going to be persuaded by the activities of other farmers, and so that's so important, isn't it? So we have about 8 minutes of devastating insight left in the session before we will emotionally bring it to a close. So who else has something they want to say or comment or question in those 8 minutes? It could be 7 minutes now, so you better hurry up.
If you want a placeholder, Toby, then I've got another answer for Christian.
Yeah, sure.
So I don't think it's just the consumers that can get greenwashed. I mean, we're actually talking to multiple audiences when we talk about our sustainability claims. And Erica's point can't be understated that the retailers really care about the products that they sell, and they are becoming increasingly sophisticated. It's increasingly difficult to pull the wool over someone's eyes and tell them a nice story about my sheep grazing my vineyard that makes me feel okay because I'm not mowing, when you really care about what the carbon footprint is of my bottle, or how are you going to recycle that PVC capsule on top of the bottle, or these other things. So we might not be getting all the pointy questions from non-wine experts, and many of our consumers aren't wine experts in the same way that this panel is. We're certainly getting them from our retailers. And I feel like that the pace of that questioning and the scrutiny that we're under is more than we've ever seen. And I'm positive that it was not that level of scrutiny 20 years ago. That retailers weren't asking those same level of questions, at least not globally, certainly not in the US. So I think that's a really positive change. The other bit that's a really positive change for a company like ours is putting out public targets. You know, when we say we're going to be 100% renewable by 2024, 100% renewable electricity, we have to hit that now. And so there's no place to hide. And then pretty soon after the first goal comes a second goal. So we'll be, carbon neutral for scope 1 and 2 by 2030. And then pretty soon you realize when you do the math that scope 3 is really where the problem is. And I don't have an answer for that yet. But all of the bottles and everything else that comes into it, the only way that we can really tackle those bigger than any individual producer or winery problems is through groups like the Sustainable Wine Roundtable. It definitely has to be a collective effort.
Yeah, we would agree. Erica?
I really understand this frustration that these topics were discussed a long time ago. Even if I was not in the wine industry 20 years ago, my father was an environmental journalist at that time, and he says, you guys are discussing the same things that we were telling you to do 20 years ago. But I spent years as a journalist focused on sustainability. Reached a point of understanding of it where I was like, okay, well, nobody's interested in listening to this anymore, the level that I want to talk about, and did some consulting. And then I left the wine industry for several years because I was so fed up with the very slow speed of adaptation we have, especially considering how much we rely on our climate, our soil, and so on. This industry cannot function without caring for these topics. But something has happened in the last few years, and even if it is early days, it's very clear that there is a difference. Just from like 2 years ago, the questions that we are getting from our retailers, and now I'm not talking about the Scandinavian monopolies and the LCBO who asked these things 5 years ago, but now the other big retailers are asking, and they are starting to ask, do you do a carbon footprint? What is it? And what do your certifications look like? And which exact SKU is covered? And they were not asking that just a few years ago. So, and I also feel like the journalists, the ones that are not specialized in sustainability like I was, but in wine, including papers like Wine Spectator, who might not have been very focused on this topic before, all of a sudden they are asking, and they are asking for metrics.
Yep.
I feel like we're at this point now, just the last couple of years, where this is going to be the beginning of a really fast progression.
I agree. Bruno, are you going to bring us crashing back down to reality, or are you in complete agreement? I'm with Erica. I'm an optimist, and I see exactly those same signs over the last couple of years, which is great. Bruno, what are the conversations that you're having? Is that reflecting the same thing?
Yes, totally. We were in a period that we want to see the signal from everywhere, looking for the future and trying to find our path. And I want to be a good boy, but every morning I ask the question, what is a good boy? And that's difficult because we have some conflict interest in ourselves and also in our stakeholder. And we have to be convinced from one thing simple, not complex, and the technology should help us to have simple view. And I hope that in the future, because I have a small company, I will find in the technology the small signal to prove to me, to myself, and to my colleague, my employee, my neighbor, that I'm doing something good.
Yeah, and technology is increasingly showing ways in which you can do that.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the points of the session. Well, if there are no more comments or questions, I think we're more or less at time. So I think we'll close this now. But thank you to the panel for their insights. A difficult and broad brief, which I think we brought down to earth with some really good practical examples. So thank you all. Thank you, the audience, for your great questions. And please join me in thanking the panel with the traditional round of applause as we close. Thank you very much. We will be back here tomorrow, same place, to talk about our sustainability reference standard, which is much more... Sorry?
Not same place.
Not same place. In another place to talk about our sustainability reference standard, which is much more interesting than it sounds. So join us then for that. Thank you.
Holding back the years, thinking of the fear I've had so long. When somebody hears, listen to the fear that's gone, strangled by the wishes of Peter.